roughly the same. You want to enhance your on-the-job skills. Certs generally crammed on into a short period of time, and then in your resume, and you can do it in a few weeks. These things, there's diplomas, masters, etc., along with the slower burn. Fairly bite-sized chunks of content. They were recorded some years ago. Content has changed, the course structure has changed, so you may find a quality difference in some of the videos. They've been sort of hacked apart and put back together to try and keep them aligned to the structure and cadence that we have today. The content for the topics themselves is still very relevant. I've recently re-reviewed that and still think it didn't need updating, just we needed to top and tail the videos with some new titles, etc., just to make sure that we weren't confusing people, because week 7 slides were now week 2 and so forth. And, you know, they'd watch a video in week 2 and it'd say webinar 7.2, like, hang on, aren't we in week 2? So that's all been fixed now. So that's the core content. Listen to those at your leisure. The webinars, the live sessions will be weekly. They won't be rehashing those pre-recorded things. A few of the topics that are more relevant to, I think, a practical workplace context will be surfaced, and we'll be dealing with those in a bit more detail. And oftentimes we'll be doing some form of technical demonstration. The demonstrations are a lot like the labs. The demos will be 15, 20 minutes. The labs might take you a couple of hours, so there's more content in them. But the idea is have a look at the way the tools work. Some of it will be to preempt what you'll be doing in the practical assessments. Others is just showing some of the tools that are useful to a cybersecurity professional. So yeah, they'll be between 60 and 90 minutes. Tonight's should be relatively short because there's no actual topic content to go through. But some will stretch out to the full 90 minutes because the topics are quite involved. The demos have a lot of steps to them, and I'm not sure if anyone here has ever been in the game of demonstrating or presenting. The demonstration guides are a fickle bunch. Some nights everything works perfectly and smoothly. Other nights nothing works. I can test it all afternoon and I get to the recording and it all falls apart. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we have a smooth running semester. Most of the demos I've done many times, but that still doesn't stop them just exploding on me when I'm actually live in class like we are now. Will this subject cover how to stop people hacking my Netscape browser? No, I'm sorry. If you're still using Netscape, I'm not sure when Netscape even still work. Probably not. It's just too old. I wouldn't recognise HTML2 or 3. The forum, as I mentioned earlier, on Brightspace. Forums are an excellent thing for these distributed class formats where we're all in different parts of the country. I'll be posting on a regular basis, on a weekly basis at least, a bit of a follow-up after each topic on some of the things we discussed, maybe some relevant links, any additional content which is useful. Also, if there's anything interesting in the news or topics that appear at work to me that are relevant, I'll post them as well, maybe some questions to get people thinking and discussing some of the contemporary issues that are faced day to day in a security professional's life. But the point is, a busy forum is a useful forum. Please post often, respond often, read everything that's in there. Generally, again, class this size, it usually ends up with a lot of posts, and hopefully, it'll be useful augmentation to the prepared content and discussions that we have in these sessions. So. All right, the subject is about, well, it's really about defense, but obviously defense is a response to attack. So we do look at attacking techniques. How do attackers breach systems? Breaching means doing reconnaissance, doing scanning, checking for vulnerabilities, exploiting vulnerabilities, escalating privilege, exfiltrating data, the whole gamut of things that will occur during a cyber attack. We'll cover techniques that attackers use. We'll look at demonstrations of some of those techniques, but Ultimately, the subject is a countermeasure subject, so we're trying to teach you or illustrate ways in which these attacks can be thwarted. To understand how to defend, you obviously need to understand how to attack, but it's not an offensive subject, although it does contain some offensive content. What can we do to defend? And also, what are the pros and cons of different defences? There's very rarely one thing that is the control for some sort of vulnerability or exposure. But making a decision on the most effective controls to use in a given circumstance is generally what a lot of security professionals spend a lot of their time doing. So really being able to boil down a problem into how does the attack occur, what's being attacked, why is it vulnerable, how can we stop the vulnerability, how can we prevent the attack, how can we then detect and respond to the attack? All of those things are relevant questions to ask whenever you're looking at a system and how it might be breached. So the objectives are really understand the process, some of the tools and some of the techniques that attackers will use, describe the attacks and how to defend against them, so what elements of the technology environment are being attacked and how they're vulnerable and how we can stop them being vulnerable and maybe put other defences in place. Analysing the weaknesses, technical and non-technical, of IT systems, and what are the defences against those weaknesses. That's really the general overview of what we'll be covering over the next 12 weeks. The text is still version 12 of the CEH study guide. That may change in the future, but for now it's still a good general overview of the topics that we're covering. About 8 of the 10 or 11 topics that we cover are really lifted from the book in terms of cadence and structure, so it's still relevant to have. It's something that is only a beginning resource for this subject. For the assessments, best you do leverage some of the stuff that we'll discuss. So do your own research using Google to find other industry publications or texts that can help you understand and answer the material. I'll be providing as much as I can. Every week's pre-recorded webinars do have a table at the end of useful links for that week. The text, you don't need all the text for the subject, but you will need more than the text. Obviously, if you go and do a CEH at some point, you will need to know this text back to front. So if that's something you want to do, maybe get yourself a copy, not just use the library copy, and keep that as a study guide for if you want to go and do the certification at some point. All right, so the structure this year. As I mentioned earlier, offensive topics are covered elsewhere. Jeremy Costa runs ITE 535, at least I hope he still does, if that's still correct. It's a penetration testing subject, so very much a red team offensive subject, all about attacking vulnerable systems. So given that that's the focus of that subject, it didn't make sense to have too much of the offensive nature here. We cover a lot of similar content. He'll go deeper into the offensive techniques and tactics. I'll gloss over them and you might get some practice with them, but we're really going to talk more about the defense against those techniques and how we keep systems safe from the people who come out of the ITE 535 track. Very good subject from what I hear. Wasn't available when I studied. I would have done it if it was, but from all accounts, it's an awesome subject. If you're considering doing it, I would recommend it. So this subject really emphasises defensive consultation. I'm a consultant by trade, and I like to base the material I cover and the assessments that we do very much on the kinds of things that you as a security professional would be asked to do. So less about writing essays and doing academic research, more about assessing real world scenarios, pulling together industry sources of information that a real professional would use, and then rendering that into some form of argument for this is why what you've shown me is rubbish, this is what you should do differently, and this is how it will fix the problems that we've identified in what you've shown me. So yeah, look, it's something that's I think I've emphasised now for a number of years in this and another subject I do, and it's usually received quite well. I think certainly from my perspective, I'm not teaching people to pass exams or get degrees. I'm teaching people to hopefully pass interviews and get jobs in cybersecurity. It is still very much a buyer's market. It's a seller's market. You will, there's more jobs than people most of the time. So, it's something that's still very much, very well worth, getting certified and experienced in. And we could use a lot more people in the industry, I can tell you that. So, so they're realistic tasks, analysis, reporting, A few students have previously asked for templates. I don't really have a template format. If you're desperate for something in terms of you've got no idea where to start in terms of writing a report that would be acceptable in a business context, sing out, put in the forum, and I'll see if I can dig something up. But please just sort of Google around. I might even grab some previous year's assessments and sanitize them a bit and just and share those once I speak to the students that wrote them. But yeah, look, I think most of you, certainly from reading some of your intro posts, have a professional background and have probably read and or written lots and lots of things in your workplace at some point in your career. So there's no hard and fast structure is my point. The assessments are fairly well articulated in the subject outline, and the requirement is that whatever you submit, it is effective and useful and sufficient in a business context, not so much an academic context. There is some overlay there. We must reference our work, and we have to follow academic integrity principles, of course. But other than that, it's generally expected to mirror a real-world engagement. So there is a new couple of weeks worth of content this semester on cyber threat intelligence. It's an emerging field. A fellow who helps out with the subject sometimes. I'm not sure if we're seeing him this semester. Chantel, is Cam joining us at all? Do you know?
Not sure yet. I think we've contacted him but haven't heard back.
Yeah, cool. All right, I'll give him a poke. Cam's a colleague from work. He's one of the senior guys in the CTI team, has helped me put together one of the assessments and also build a couple of weeks worth of material for what I think is a really important part of a defender's discipline, of a defensive organisation, a security organisation's defensive component. It's not just about getting on the tools to configure firewalls and understand network packets and look at cryptography. It's also about understanding your attackers and how do you find the attackers? How do you understand how they work? How do you classify the techniques that they use? All of that makes up a discipline that's now known as cyber threat intelligence. So hopefully the content will be interesting. It's weeks 6 and 7, so before and after the Christmas break. The final assessment is a CTI report based off some real-world experience of job interview questions for CTI analysts. And it's basically tracking a potential malicious actor across the internet and finding out as much as you can by doing some research using open source intelligence tools, which we'll cover in the webinars and we'll look at in the live demos as well. But it's been a lot of fun creating some fake people all over the internet, getting ready and seeding things for you guys to go and find. So hopefully it all comes together and works as expected. It's the first run, so I've made an assessment for and I've put the content later in the semester so we have time to maybe tune it a bit as we go. But it's been fun to set up. Hopefully the assessment will be fun to do. And as I said, it's based off an actual interview question that I know cyber threat intelligence analysts, prospective analysts, have been asked in job interviews. So these tools and this approach is something that you very much will use in the real world. So there's no exam. The subject didn't really lend itself to an exam. You can only ask people so many times what port is HTTPS on. Tell me about ICMP. What message type is a GO request, and that's that kind of stuff that the exams were asking back in the day. That's stuff you can look up. Very rarely will we find ourselves in a workplace with zero resources, either a colleague or a phone with access to Google or sitting in front of a console with internet access. It's all about understanding how to effectively find information, to determine what is good and accurate information from a pool of information and then apply that in an effective way. So found that the exam wasn't really the best way to test the knowledge in the subject, and hence we did away with it a few years back. So it's all assignment based. Practical and written assessments. The first couple have a practical component. In fact, they probably all do now, given that the final one will require some OSINT work online as well. So, but yes, there is a bit of writing to do to submit those once they're done. So the live session schedule, it looks a lot like the subject schedule. Tonight's just the intro. Next week, we'll look at password-based security, and that is a prelude to your first assessment, which is password cracking. The assessment used to be cracking and reporting in one. We've split it in two. Now the first assessment is simply cracking the file using the cracking tools. It's a pass-fail. I don't yet have the file ready for download. I'll get that up this week or at the weekend at the latest. I obviously need to change it from last year's file because getting a certain number of cracked passwords is the threshold for passing and failing. You won't need to get all of them. Getting all of them will require you to really understand the tools you're using, but I need to then build a set of users and then export the database and supply that to you. So that'll be coming in the next few days. I would have had it out, but my AD controller that I use for that died when I fired it up. It does it all the time. I really need to build a new one, but if I can just limp this one along for the rest of this semester, all I need is one more set of users in a password database and we're good to go. It will be an AD database. It's an ntds.dit file. Used to be a bunch of Windows SAM dumps and Linux shadow files. That's what we did for a long time, but a little while back we sort of upgraded to an ntds.dit. So yeah, it's hopefully a bit of fun. So extracting passwords from that is step one, and then using a tool, probably Hashcat, but we'll cover those tools next week, to crack the passwords and yeah, submit that as assessment one. Week 3, we do reconnaissance, scanning and enumeration. How do attackers find you? What can they find? What can they see? Once they know where they're looking, how do they scan your network? How do they scan your systems to find out what's vulnerable? Following that, we'll do exfiltration and DDoS, so network-based threats. Once attackers are in your network, they are able to then exfil data from your network, potentially, and we'll look at some of the ways that occurs and talk about how they can be defended against. And we'll just touch a little bit on distributed denial of service, given it's a very common attack type and something that you'll read about a lot in the news. Session management and web hacking in week 5, that will be the prelude to assessment 3 later on in week 8 that's due. So that's looking at how we maintain session state with web servers, what constitutes good and bad session state management, and then we'll get some material for you to analyse and report on as part of your A3. Week 6 and 7, as I mentioned, they will be the CTI topics. The pre-recorded stuff is not complete yet. That's all brand new and still being created, but I'll get that up, posted up in the next week or 10 days at the absolute outside. So a bunch of pre-recorded webinars and some slide decks, and we'll do a couple of live demos of some of the OSINT tools that you'll be expected to use as part of the assessment 4. Oh, by the way, assessment 2 is a analysis of the passwords that you will crack as assessment 1. We'll talk a bit more about those on the next slide. Continuing after the break, we'll look at cryptography and PKI, public key infrastructure. So it's a ubiquitous topic. Everywhere you look, you have crypto somewhere. It's part of logging into systems. It's part of securing data at rest. It's part of securing data in transit. It's as old as time. And is changing all the time. So definitely some fundamental principles that are worth covering, and just the, running through all the primitives of cryptography, which you'll probably see in other subjects as well. But something which is a real world context you will work with a lot is PKI, so public and private keys, TLS certificates and that sort of thing. So we'll dwell a little bit more on that, given that that is where most people get in contact with crypto as part of their day-to-day. And by the way, when I say crypto, I mean cryptography. I'm not down with cryptocurrency. So cryptography was called crypto a long time before cryptocurrency existed, but they seem to have taken over the word, unfortunately. So I do have some Dogecoin, actually. I have a couple of coins of various stripes. So I noticed just the other day, off the back of the recent world events, that my portfolio is up a little bit. I mean, when I say a little bit, I'm talking $50 because I just have a few coins to keep an eye on the. I love the technology behind cryptocurrency. I've done a bit of work with blockchain, taught blockchain, and worked with blockchain projects in the past. But it's, yeah, we'll talk more about it in the cryptography session. I think I won't go down that rabbit hole tonight. 200 bit. Oh, are you okay? You okay? Cryptography. 200 bitcoins in 2011. Yeah, I bet. What'd you buy a pizza with that or something? I know that happened back in the day. Anyway, yeah. What's it up to? About 80k, 82k at the moment. Yeah, 75 each. Oh, you would have thought that was an absolute mozza in the day. Yeah, 75,000. 134 Aussie, is it? Wow. Yeah, mental. All right. Week 10, we look at malware analysis. So malware is something, again, as a cybersecurity professional and as a user of computing equipment, you're going to see or you're going to experience. We're going to do something interesting. We're going to look at a piece of malware, a piece of ransomware, and we're going to pull it apart and set up a lab where we can activate it and find out what's going on under the covers when you get ransomware, what's happening in the background. So we'll set up a fake internet responder. We'll get a very isolated lab environment set up, and there's a lot of disclaimers in that lab. So if you're going to do the malware one at home, be careful. I have ransomwared my home system doing this demo in this class. Thankfully, it was only a couple of folders, but it was rather embarrassing. And then after telling the students that, hey, this is an old piece of ransomware, it's been cracked and everyone knows the keys and don't worry about it, all of a sudden I had to go, geez, I hope I was telling the truth. Turns out I was. You can actually get decryptors. There's a few of them on the market. It did take me a few downloads to get the right one, but eventually I was able to reverse the damage done by my error. So I'll cover how that occurred and how you shouldn't make the same mistake if you're doing it at home when we do that lab in week 10. So a bit of wireless networking towards the end. We just covered that in a fairly high level. I don't have anything practical for that. I have tried to set something up for years, but it's not something that lends itself really well to a practical demo. I may get something together before then, but I won't promise anything. And the final week, we'll look at cloud security. So cloud obviously is a ubiquitous thing today. It used to be niche, not anymore. And there's a lot of, cloud security means a lot of things. It depends on which cloud and which angle you're coming at it from, whether you're an integrator or a cloud provider yourself, or whether you're a client using the cloud environments. Is it SaaS? Is it, IaaS or PaaS? So we'll look at some specific or a specific set of actions in a scenario in the AWS cloud where a misconfiguration, totally innocent misconfiguration, can have unintended consequences. And we'll walk through an attack scenario where somebody could potentially take over your account if you misconfigure your cloud. It is a complex environment, getting more complex every day. So my ransomware demo has achieved legend status. Yeah, I hope so. Oh dear. Right. Assessments, sort of covered these. 10%er in the first, or in week 3, it's a pass-fail. There'll be 52 users, 26 male, 26 female. I just like to keep it neat. Half names starting with every letter of the alphabet. Of the 52, the threshold for a pass will be about 50%. I'll work out once I've created the passwords what that level is. And then there'll be some sort of, tiers of achievement above that, which won't actually give you any more marks, but will certainly stand you in good stead for when it comes to task 2, which will be writing an assessment. The more you can see about the passwords inside the file in assessment 1, the more informed your report on how bad these users are at choosing passwords and maybe what the company, this fictional company, can do to better secure its authentication. And that's really what the second task is all about. So it's reporting on what you found in task 1 and providing some recommendations to the client to say, well, this is what we found, this is why it's bad, this is what you should do. Task 3 is a little bit bigger. That's due later in the semester, as I mentioned before. Week 8, that's about reporting on the session management information you'll be given. So you'll be given some cookies. Those cookies will contain strings of data and they'll have configuration. And you'll need to do some research on, what constitutes a good cookie, a bad cookie, what's in these cookies, what does that mean? Think about how they're used by reading the material. And then propose, well, first of all, again, critique why they're bad and propose to the client maybe something they could do better. It's not about coming out with super detailed technical, you don't have to write the code to generate the new session material, but the recommendations that are best practice from organisations like OWASP and other respected shops that output good information for security professionals and developers alike. So task number 4 is the threat intelligence report. So that's due right at the end. And that'll be, again, using the CTI tools, OSINT tools, and some of the things that we'll talk about in week 6 and 7 to uncover the identity and the whereabouts and the behaviour of a potential adversary. So as though you're working in a defensive capacity and you want to understand how big a threat is this potential adversary so that you can best defend against their modus operandi, their attack types and what they're likely to do to their victims, and maybe also pass information on to law enforcement to help track them down and catch them. So that's really, I guess, what the thrust of task 4 is all about. So.
as you move on, but just before you move on, Simon,
Yeah, sure.
Wayne had asked earlier, with holidays, etc. coming up, do you think we will have all the material needed for the A4 assessment up before Christmas? So obviously that's week 6 and 7, which is after Christmas, if my memory serves me correctly.
6 is before, 7 is after. So
6, yeah.
I'll try and cover everything you need to get started on assessment 4 before we break, and then we may again. I'm forecasting it'll be a 2-week session, 2 weeks of sessions. We may even do all of it in the first week and just maybe Q&A the week after Christmas, because if anyone started their assessment, they may have be having some issues. So to be honest, I haven't written the live sessions for week 6 and 7 yet. I only got rough notes, but I'll endeavour to cover the important stuff before we break, so you've got that before we go. So you can hold me to that. All right. Assessments, extensions you need to make in advance of the due date. There's an extension process. Pretty sure there is or will be a post on Brightspace explaining how how extensions will work. The subject coordinator, whose name is John, supported by Leaf, will be, or Leif. How do I pronounce that, Chantal? Is it Leif or Leaf?
It is Leif.
Leif, I'm sorry. Leif will help facilitate anything you need in terms of extensions and so forth. So just go direct to the admin email address. Referencing, not required in task 1, it is simply practically cracking the file and submitting the list of passwords. Referencing is required for tasks 2 to 4. I'm not expecting you to go and find academic journal articles. There's not that many on the contemporary topics that we're going to be talking about. But use respected industry literature. There is a lot of organisations that we'll talk about throughout the semester. NIST, the Australian Cyber Security Centre, most governments, certainly the Five Eyes governments, Canada, the UK, etc., they have very mature risk management and cybersecurity management documentation, handbooks of controls, threats, etc. So plenty of really, really good juicy industry literature out there, and there's our text if it's useful, and it will be in some cases, and any other texts or books in the library you might find as well. So not expecting hundreds of academic articles, peer-reviewed articles, it's just not that kind of subject, but be judicious in choosing the best of the industry literature out there, and I'll certainly be giving you plenty of tips throughout the semester on stuff that you should read, not just for the assessments, but also stuff that you'll use in the workplace. And I know a few are already in the cyberspace, so you'll probably know a lot of this stuff anyway, like NIST 800-53, which is a controls framework, very, very commonly used in many organisations to structure their sort of security controls in-house. So, yes, sorry, I'm just reading your message, Chantal. Plagiarism, obviously, don't need to say it, won't be tolerated. It has happened, it doesn't happen often, please don't do it. Papers are checked using Turnitin. I believe that still happens. In fact, do we ask students to do it themselves still, Chantal? What's the process with that right now? This information could be slightly out of date.
I believe it's part of the process of submitting an assignment that you might have to go through Turnitin, but you should do it yourself. Yes. I've said it to students before, but it's worth saying. We do check any assignments, check assignments through Turnitin, and anything over 25% is what we look at most closely. And definitely doesn't mean that you have plagiarized, but it's worth a look to see what's highlighted and make sure that you have appropriate references near everything.
Certainly shorter assignments have higher percentages because there's a lot more reused content, reference lists and so forth. Do often ping it, but yeah, look, just do it for your own peace of mind. Make sure it's your own work. University policy is that generative AI is not to be used. If it is something that you are used to using for your research and you treat it like a Google search to collate information, I personally don't have a problem with that, but please do not copy-paste Gen AI text. It's getting really easy to pick. Well, it'll probably get harder as time goes by, but I can tell at work when someone emails me and all they've done is copy the ChatGPT output. It sort of has a certain sound to it, and it is forbidden by uni policy. It is something that, unless it's part of the subject sort of core structure, which it isn't in this case, please don't use it for creating any material that you will submit. So, right. I'll just carry on. I think we've got a couple of questions here. Tool. have to check out the Turnitin stuff. I'm not the expert on that, so I think Chantel's thinking of that for us. Bellingcat's toolkit or personal OSINT tool. The Bellingcat toolkit is good. I mean, it's an aggregate of other things, and there are lots of other, you know, platforms and so forth. There's, well, Kali has a bunch of OSINT tools on it. I'm trying to think of the other Linux platform. I've only used it briefly, but it's a sort of a competitor, not that it's a commercial product, but a competitor to Kali. It's a compilation of Tails. It's a compilation of you know, a fairly secure Linux install with a bunch of open source tools for security testing and security research. Parrot, that's the other one. Sorry, Tails is a lightweight secure Linux. Parrot is the one that is the Kali mirror. So the labs are not available yet. I will post them. I've actually just been going through them today just to make sure there's nothing that needs changing. As I've finished validating each one, I'll post the PDFs onto the topic pages themselves. So I'll sing out on the forums once that's done, give it another day or so. But they're sort of most useful, I guess, in the weeks that the topic is covered. But that's not to say you can't grab them and get on with them straight away. We'll talk a bit more about labs right now. So a virtual lab. This is a picture I put together yonks ago. It sort of explains roughly, for those of you who don't have any virtual machine or virtual networking experience, how this all works. So how many of you have experience with virtual platforms, ESX, you know, VirtualBox, Parallels, yep. Anyone who's been in an infrastructured role or a support role in the last 10 years, Hyper-V, yeah, Proxmox, yeah, Oracle VirtualBox, good, yeah, good. Yeah, like I expect that probably 60–70% of you, it's something that you're quite familiar with. For anyone who's not familiar, I'll quickly go through a couple of fundamentals here. The first lab, which I actually have posted, now that I think of it, I was starting to post them just before the session tonight. The first lab is simply a virtual lab setup with some Linux shell basics for anyone who's not used Linux before, or the bash shell. So that PDF is already linked to, if I just open up my browser, it's linked to the, in the content section of Brightspace under Introduction and Fundamentals under the Watch and Read tab. So I've added another heading, Do, and there's a link there to a PDF. And I'll add those headings and the links to the PDFs for the other labs over the course of the next 24 hours or so. So you'll have those in various weeks throughout the semester, as in linked to various topics throughout the semester where they're relevant. So virtual environments, really what you're doing is running software on another computer. So in the case of VirtualBox, which is the one that I've used here because it's free and it's open source and it's quite common, it runs on everything. That is, it's not what's called a bare metal hypervisor, it's a software hypervisor. It runs in Windows or it runs in Mac or it runs in Linux. So it needs an operating system and then it runs on top of that. Other products like Proxmox, Hyper-V, and ESX are really bare metal installations. You run them on the hardware and then that's all that runs. They are their own operating system. I mean, Hyper-V is really just part of the Windows Server suite. So you're sort of running Windows Server but acting as a Hyper-V host. ESX is its own operating system based on a Unix or Linux base. So you don't install Windows and then those, you just install the product. We're using, or I'm using, and you're welcome to use if you're not familiar with it, or if you are to keep using it, VirtualBox. The labs are geared towards VirtualBox. They will have screenshots and instructions of how to do the tasks in VirtualBox. If you're not using that, I'm assuming that you know how to use the product and you'll know how to translate the instructions to your chosen hypervisor. But the way it works is your physical computer runs a piece of software. That piece of software runs other instances of operating systems known as virtual clients. They all share your network adapter. So your physical computer is plugged into a network or is on a wireless network. The virtual machines can share that network and communicate with the outside world in a number of different ways, which we'll look at in a sec. Sorry, Akrit, you asked, will I upload some VM images? I will. In fact, there's a link to them in the first lab PDF, and I'll get to that in just a second. So all those images are available on Dropbox to download. So there's a couple of different network types, the four that are highlighted there: NAT, bridged, internal, and host only. They are the ones that will we'll worry about. There are others, but we don't really need to worry about those. They're less commonly used, and we certainly don't have to use them in the labs that we do. VirtualBox, as I said, is the hypervisor that I use, the software hypervisor. All my Linux boxes are Ubuntu, quite an old version now, but it's a nice, Debian-based Linux. The one Linux I'm quite familiar with, even though I don't consider myself a Linux expert by any means. I came quite late to the Linux party. Kali is the sort of security platform of choice. It's a version of Linux with a whole bunch of preloaded tools and config. And Windows 7, which is our sacrificial lamb. I have an old Windows 7 box with all the security turned off, made very vulnerable, and we'll be using that as our attack target in a number of the demos and a number of the labs as well. So, right, so the virtual networking types, just to sort of summarize each one, just so at least run through them once. On the top row, we have two different types of virtual networking. One's called bridged and one's called NAT, or Network Address Translation. Both of these allow external access from the virtual client to your home network and or the internet if your home network's connected to the internet. If it's a bridged adapter, you have two-way connections, because what bridged adapter does is it creates a virtual adapter on the physical adapter and gives it its own address. So you're not sharing the IP address of your physical system that you're running VirtualBox on. So if your physical system is 10.0.0.1, your bridge adapter will give your virtual machine, say, 10.0.0.2, 10.0.0.3, etc., whatever your local network is handing out in terms of address space. And most home routers and setups will have a DHCP server handing out addresses to anyone who requests them. In a bridged adapter, your VMs will request addresses just as though they were physical systems on the network. So that's the closest approximation to a proper physical network of multiple machines. Inbound communication, outbound communication, whatever you need. In the case of NAT, which is the default, that allows outbound communication, but not inbound communication. You can't directly talk to the virtual machines, only to the physical host. But the virtual machines can translate their traffic across the physical adapter that your machine uses, and therefore they can access the internet or they can access resources elsewhere on your network, but nothing outside can access back into those virtual machines, unless you do some setup and some jiggering around with the NAT and so forth. But generally you use NAT when you just want outbound access. For instance, you want to run Windows Update, or you want to do apt install something on a Linux box, so you just want to get to the internet. The bottom row are the types of networks you do when privacy in the network is super important. This is something we will absolutely emphasize in the malware lab. You do not want your malware lab connected to your home network. I'll say it again, and I'll say it again in a couple of weeks when we do the lab. The internal network variant is where simply the VMs can talk to each other, but nothing else. Nothing can talk in, nothing can talk out. They can't talk to the host. They can simply talk to each other. And you can set up multiple virtual networks. You can have virtual network A, B, C, and if you join your VMs to each virtual network, it's like plugging them into a hub. And everything on that network can talk, but they can't talk between networks, and they can't talk outside to the rest of the network. Host-only adapter is a variation on that, which means that the virtual machines can talk only to the host can talk to the virtual machines, but the virtual machines can't talk to each other and they can't talk to the outside world. Less commonly used, but I thought I'd just throw it in for completeness. So bridged is great if you want to run real machines with real addresses. NAT is the default, useful for many, many circumstances. Internal is when you want to protect your outside network from your VMs or your VMs from your outside network and allow nothing between the two. Right, the machines we're going to be using, 18.04 of Ubuntu. I know it's old, it's what, 6 years old now? It's an image or a couple of images I prepared, trimmed them right down to just the bare basics, made them as small as possible so that they could be downloaded fairly quickly. You can see there in the screenshot at the bottom, the Ubuntu-Micro 2022.1 is the most recent version of the Micro Ubuntu install. It's only just over a gig in compressed OVA, which is a virtual appliance format, an importable virtual appliance, so you can import OVAs again and again and again into VirtualBox, into ESX, or any other VMware platform or whatever. I believe that OVA is an open virtual appliance. Yeah, it's in the name, it's open. So every virtual hypervisor should be able to import an OVA with some success. So the reason behind using that is it gives us enough to do most of what we need. It's a smallish download, only 1 gig, fairly quick to start up, and it only, I think I've only configured it with about 512 megs of RAM. So it's a bare minimum Ubuntu install, about 8 gigs of disk, 512 megs of RAM. You can run multiples on most modern PCs. You could run 2 or 3 or 4 of them on a PC with 8 gigs or 16 gigs of RAM quite easily without impacting the operating system. The other ones there, Kali, it's a 2019 Kali, again, an old version. Most of what we do in Kali will be universally available, so all versions of Kali will work. They're released a couple of times a year, so there's lots and lots of updates since 2019. The reason I still use the 2019 version and still distribute it, and as you can see it's quite large, it's nearly 7 gigs. The vulnerability scanner that we use in one of the weeks, I think week 3, where it's called, it used to be called OpenVAS, it's now called GSA, Greenbone Security Analyzer. It's a free open source vulnerability scanner, free on most platforms. Used to be pre-installed with Kali, you now have to install it if you download the latest Kali, but it's fairly quick to install and not too hard to set up. However, the download of the vulnerability signatures is quite large, takes a long time, and there are limitations because it's a free product. If multiple people on the same address are doing it together, it can saturate the servers and they'll block your IP. I used to use these images in a physical classroom context, and I couldn't have 25 students all downloading GSA signatures at the same time. We would have had the university's IP address blocked. So I pre-configured Kali's OpenVAS or GSA with signatures. They're pretty old now, of course. I don't think they've been updated to about 2020, so I wouldn't use that in a production sense. I would build myself a brand new Kali or a brand new Ubuntu, get the latest version of GSA, get the latest signatures, and then you would have a very functional, free vulnerability scanner. But the 2019 version of Kali Linux that you can download from my Dropbox will have a fully set up and ready to go GSA with all the signatures, so it'll just get you off and running a lot quicker. The Ubuntu server image is a bigger version of the micro. I don't actually use that in the labs, but it's there if you wanted something to play with. It's a more robust version. Micro is quite small, and the Ubuntu server is configured with more memory, bigger disk, and a lot more of the built-in tools are installed as well. And there's our little Windows 7 at the bottom, which will throw all sorts of licensing messages. Ignore them if you run it. It's an old version that Microsoft used to distribute for developers to do testing. It's perfectly legal. It just is so far out of license now, they try and nag you to upgrade, and you shouldn't be using Windows 7. Yes, I know, but I'm using it to attack. Therefore, I want an old vulnerable system, because attacking Windows 10 and Windows 11 is actually pretty hard. Microsoft have come a long way. They used to be terrible at security. They've got a lot better. The link there to the Dropbox folder where you can get everything, that'll be in the PDF as well, so it's clickable. This PDF of this session tonight will also be uploaded to Brightspace, so you can get the link from either place. The labs, as I mentioned, they use the templates that are provided. You can do all of the work in the labs by setting up your own VMs from scratch. You can do it any way you like. If you're less familiar with the tools and this is fairly new to you, the labs are they hold your hand at the start at least very, very carefully, and they'll walk you through the process. They're quite long, the first few, because they do really run through step by step. Later in the semester, they'll gloss over some of the earlier steps, or you'll need to refer back to remember, how do I set up a shared folder on a VirtualBox VM or whatever? Or what are those Linux commands again? They'll be back in an earlier lab. So the later ones are less hand-holdy, but the early ones are quite hand-holdy. They cover virtual lab setup. We do the network and vulnerability scanning, so Nmap and OpenVAS GSA. And again, these will mirror the sessions we do each week. Actually attacking a system with Metasploit, which we'll also do in week 3 as a sort of a coda to the OpenVAS scan. Once we find out how the box is vulnerable, we'll actually do an exploit using Metasploit. The Tesla crypt analysis in the malware with INETSIM as a tool to help facilitate that. That's in the malware lab. Again, be careful, please be careful. It's full of disclaimers, but it's at your own risk. Buy everywhere. Data exfil, got some custom Python scripts, and we'll do some data exfiltration using ICMP and DNS. And then also web attacks. In the web session, we will look at a vulnerable site called Hackathon, which was built for penetration test training and things like what we will do. But we'll also use Docker, and we'll set up Hackathon as a container, and we'll then use Netcat to do some session cookie stealing as well. So a little bit in that week, we'll cover a few things. Docker and so forth is not a security topic, but it's just something that's so common in the workplace these days, I figured, rather than just use some anonymous hackers on box, let's build one using a Docker image. That way it's portable, you can take it home and play with it, and so on. So, all right. Quick demo, just to walk through the virtual lab process. This will only take a couple of minutes. Christopher, when can we start A1? You can start anytime you like. We will, next week in this session, be running through the process pretty much step by step. So if you're completely lost, you can look at the stuff in the meantime. I will, actually, the live session is not posted yet, but we will do, the week 2 live session is absolutely a walkthrough of most of the steps you'll need to achieve some tangible output for A1. We really want you to succeed in it. Like, I don't think anyone will get to A1 and not have any clue and not be able to crack their passwords. I've had some challenges over the years of students who have literally zero hands-on experience with, you sort of say, have you used DOS? And they say, what's a DOS? Okay, we're starting at the absolute basics, but even in those cases, we can get them using Hashcat and cracking some passwords fairly quickly. So it sounds complicated if you've never done it before. There are a few steps and there's a few terms and a few things you'll need to set up and some arcane looking commands you have to run, but we'll explain all of that, and once you do it a few times, it'll all seem quite simple to you. So, all right, so virtual...
Before you jump into the demo, we have those 2 questions about the practical labs.
Yep.
I'm sure you talked about it, but I was busy typing out answers to
That's
things.
okay. Yeah.
And I just wanted to have it in words. When are the practical labs? When will we have them?
So lab 1 is already there. If I just move this tab over here, so that should be on the screen now. So at the bottom of the watch and read section of topic 1, you'll see here virtual lab setup. So there's virtual lab 1. So
Great.
lab 1 is already on Brightspace. I'm going to run through labs 2 to 6 tonight or tomorrow morning. Just make sure there's no errors. There was a few typos I corrected. I just want to make sure I've got the latest version of all the PDFs. Once that's done, I'll upload each of those to the weeks where they make sense, and I'll then post an announcement just letting everyone know that they're there and ready to go. So 24 hours max, and I'll be up.
Thank you.
No problem. Let me just get rid of that. All right, so VirtualBox, where are we? Here. If I can find it. Where's it gone? Over here. All right, so VirtualBox looks something like this. Yours won't have all of this in here if I've never used it before, but you can organise your VMs all into folders like this, of course. I've got all manner of things installed, but it's very, very simple to set up. If you wanted to create a virtual machine from scratch, so this is creating what would be called the virtual hardware, as it were. So a container in which you could install an operating system. So you're just configuring and allocating memory and disk and so forth and a number of CPU threads ready to build a virtual machine. So we go to machine new. You give it a name, so I won't actually go the whole way and set it up because I'll need to have an operating system to install. A folder for it to go into, I've just got a drive called V, which is where I stick all my virtual machines. ISO image, that's the CD-ROM image, the optical media image, for anyone who's old enough to remember those, that you would then use to install your operating system from. So it uses a file, being an ISO file, so I've got lots and lots of those, so I could choose an ISO like that one. The type, you generally want to then give it the type operating system you're installing. Once upon a time, this was quite limited. Now it's very expansive. Just about everything you're ever going to use is going to be in here. The reason you choose the right one is VirtualBox knows how much memory, what kind of virtual disk adapter to use, what kind of virtual network adapter to use, what kind of virtual video adapter to use. So different operating systems support different features, and if your operating system is some flavor of Windows that's quite new, it will give you a more powerful set of virtual hardware, which will give you better graphics and so forth, and maybe sound. Whereas if you're doing a very basic Linux or a BSD, it will maybe not give you a sound adapter or not give you a much so advanced video adapter. So it cuts down resource requirements, but it customizes it as best for the operating system. All this can be changed, of course. This just helps walk you through it. So I'm going to do Linux. It is, where are we? Ubuntu, it goes all the way back to supporting 10. So where we go, 1804, 64-bit, because that's what my ISO is. And really, you can then just go finish, and that would then just create an empty container, but there's no operating system running. If we start this now, and we go right-click Start, it'll now I'll pop up a little console window in a few seconds. So that's our booting machine, that's our virtual BIOS. It has mounted the ISO, so now it's saying, oh, you want to install from the ISO, that's running off the attached optical image, so I can say install, and that will start the process of setting up a brand new Ubuntu server inside an empty virtual box. So that's not something that you need to do for any of the labs or for this subject, it's just that's how you would normally build a virtual system, similar to building physical hardware, sticking a USB key in and then turning it on and then walking through the operating system install. So just that one off. What we'll be doing is building images using the supplied appliances, the templates. So for that, you use File, Import Appliance, and I go to my V drive and go to my OVAs. Choose one in here, let's do Ubuntu Micro, it's very quick to install. Double click on that, so it's chosen the image. Really the only things you need to change is you can give it a new name if you want. So, excuse me, let's just call this Ubuntu Micro. You can see in the description the username and password for all of the VMs is in this description setting. It's lab user is the username and pass is the password. And you can see there it's running 2 virtual CPUs, just makes it a little bit more snappier than a single one. Most people's PCs have at least 8 cores now, or 16 or more, so 2 shouldn't be a problem. 512 megs of RAM, it's all Ubuntu command line version needs. Optical drive, if you want that. USB, if you want that. Obviously a network adapter. And it doesn't actually have a sound card or anything because it knows it's a very basic version of Linux. Now the base folder is where it will put your virtual machine files in a folder named after the machine itself, and then which group I want to put it in. So I want to put it into my 2024 group, and it'll appear over here, and then just hit the finish button. And then that will take probably about 5 seconds or 10 seconds, maybe 15. There we go. It's happening, 20%, come on. Used to be quicker than this, what's going on? Anyway, so what that'll do is it will give us another version of this here, and then you can see when we start this one up, because here's one I prepared earlier. Oh, there we go, it's already finished, so it rushed through those last couple of percent quite quick. So this will start up quite smartly. It's a very lean system, a very lean operating system. There we go, and we want to log in with lab user and pass. There we go, and the first thing you would do, as it will show you in the lab, is you would just check to see if there's any software updates. And it has a NAT adapter. If you look in the virtual machine configuration, you can see that in the network, it's attached to NAT. So that means this guy has connections outbound to the internet, but nothing can initiate connection back in. Obviously, packets return statefully across the NAT, but you can't address this machine from outside the network in any way, shape or form. So that's using the default NAT adapter. So that's connected to the APT database and check what software updates are available, and you can walk through that as part of the lab. So that's fully running and loggable, inable virtual machine in about 20 seconds from scratch. It's nice, a nice light version of Linux to work with. I'm not sure, does this have Docker installed? I don't think it does. No, it doesn't. Does it have Git installed? Yes, it does. Okay, it's been a while since I looked at this image. I wasn't sure what's on it. All right, we'll shut that one down. That's pretty much it. Well, actually, something I could have shown you. One more thing. We're pretty good here. I've just gone the hour. One more final thing. I did mention bridge networking. I can show you the difference there. Let me just fire up the new machine. Okay, there we go. I'll cut seconds and log me in, or let me log in. Okay, so if we do an ifconfig, which gives us the interface config for a Linux machine, you can see there that the address is 10.0.2.15. So at the top of the network adapter, the physical virtual adapter on the virtual machine is called EMP0S3. That's what they're always called in Ubuntu, the default. And you can see on the second line of that first blob of text, INET, which is the internet address, the IP address, is 10.0.2.15. That's the internal address inside the virtual network. It has no address on the outside. It will hit the virtual network, which will then hit the physical network adapter in my computer, which will then map the connection out to the internet or to my computer, to my home network. But if I change this to bridged, so I can go to networking and now say bridged adapter and OK. And now we just have to up and down the interface. EMP, actually start EMP 0 S3 down. And we'll bring it back up. Now, if we run ifconfig again, you'll see it has an address 192.168.1.93. So it's now picked up an address off my home DHCP server. Your home address range is probably 192.168.1. something or 10.0.0. something. They're most commonly used for home networks. So simply by changing the networking type in VirtualBox and then basically restarting the network interface, it contacted my local network and said, I'm a new machine, can I please have an address? And now I've got an address. So if I was to go onto my desktop, my Windows box that I'm currently on here, and I would say ping 93, I actually get a response. So I'm now able to ping the virtual machine from my physical desktop. So that's going out to the router and then back across the network to the same interface, but now it's a proper network ping across my local network. So that's the difference between bridged and NAT. NAT gives you outbound. Bridged will let you let your machine act as though it's actually on your network. So you could run an entire suite of things on your local PC in VirtualBox, and each of them would have a unique address, and they could be accessible anywhere from your home network, which is pretty cool. Obviously pretty obvious if you're very familiar with virtual machines, but maybe not so obvious if it's a new topic for you. All right, that's pretty much it, folks. Any final questions before we call it a night? Everyone looking forward to the semester? I am. I like this subject. I always enjoy teaching it. It's always a bit of fun. Now I've lost the chat. Here we go. Ah, that's why I couldn't see those messages, Chantel. my chat scrolling had stopped. So, yeah, that's true, Helen. Yes, they were indeed. ISO is a suite of standards, and it just happens to be that ISO 9660 was the CD-ROM format, and that's how we ended up with ISO files. Yeah, that's true. Very true. Good. All right. I will end the recording there. Thank you all for your attendance. Hope that was enlightening. I hope you're enthusiastic about the semester. Any final questions or comments?
We did just get a crit asking, sorry if I mispronounced that, will there be an announcement when A1 file is uploaded?